Good morning, my friends. Thanks for joining me today as we continue our study of God's Word together in unfolding the Word. We're in the midst of Daniel. We're now in the final segments of Daniel, the final vision that God gave to Daniel in chapters 10, 11, and into the first part of chapter 12. I'm going to be reading today just two of the verses. We read all of them yesterday, but I want to read them again to you. Verse 29 of chapter 11. At the time appointed, he shall return and come into the south, but it shall not be this time as it was before. Talking about Antiochus Epiphanes. For the ships of Kittim will come against him, and he shall be afraid and withdraw, and shall turn back and be enraged and take action against the holy covenant. He shall turn back and pay attention to those who forsake the holy covenant. Forces from him shall appear and profane the temple and fortress and take away the regular burnt offerings. And they shall set up the abomination that makes desolate. Well, we're looking at details in this final vision that fill out some of the emptier areas in the preceding visions. God is trying to make it plain to us enough about the future that we know He's the Lord of it, and it's unfolding according to His plan, not our plan. The first stop in the details in this last vision had to do with Medo-Persian Empire and what would happen to it from the time of Daniel until Alexander came on the scene. The second stop in the details had to do with the Greek Empire under Alexander and its subsequent breaking into four Greek empires upon his death. The third stop in the details outlined the continuing conflict between two of those empires of the Greeks, one the Seleucid Empire and the other the Ptolemaic Empire, which also oversaw, by the way, Egypt. And that was continuing to express itself in ways that impacted on Palestine, on the Holy Land, on Judea. Finally, the fourth stop, which we began to look at yesterday, had to do with the bloody reign of Antiochus Epiphanes, the most infamous of the Seleucid emperors. Chapter 8 told us much more about this particular ruler, called the Little Horn in chapter 8. We saw how his great goal was to stamp out all of the faiths and cultures under his area of rule and replace them with what he perceived to be the superior Greek culture. He Hellenized, is the way the historians put it, much of that region of the Eastern Mediterranean and the Middle East. Well, we saw yesterday that he ended up being defeated by the combined alliance of the Roman Empire, which was growing in power in the Western Mediterranean region, and what was left of the defeated Ptolemaic Empire, synonymous with Egypt. He went and found himself facing an impossible obstacle. And that brings us to where we are today as we continue to look at it and examine the bloody reign of Antiochus Epiphanes. And once again, God gives us that information because He wants the Jews, first of all, and all of us as His people to see enough of the details in advance that we know who's the Lord of history. And that history, in fact, will unfold according to His purpose and His plan. Are you gaining that outcome out of our study of Daniel? I hope you do. It's not merely to satisfy your curiosity about things in the past and to learn some prophecy, but to understand all of it points to the sovereignty of God and the one in that undisputed fact that He is the Lord of history. Well, at any rate, I ended yesterday by talking about the fact that this combined army of Romans and Ptolemaic Greeks was too great for Antiochus Epiphanes to defeat. And so when he went down to deal with the rebellion of the Ptolemies in Egypt, he had to turn back from it. He lost face. And as he turned back from that time in 168 BC and began to retreat from that border of Egypt and began to work his way back, it was at that point in time, at the low point, the first real setback in his overall leadership, that he learns of a rebellion in Judea. The Jewish nationalists taking on some courage from what they saw happen in Egypt with the Ptolemaic Roman alliance, decided this is our time to get rid of this hated Antiochus Epiphanes. He's always creating grief for us. He's trying to stamp out our culture, trying to stamp out our religion. This is the time to rebel. It had been brewing for years. And as he heard about this rebellion, he was in fury, according to the historians, the records of the day. And in fury, he attacks Judea and Jerusalem. And remember, his whole army was there. His whole combined forces that he thought he would need to defeat the Ptolemaics in Egypt couldn't fight against the Ptolemy and Roman combination alliance. But the army that he had with him was vastly more than would have been needed to defeat the Jews in Palestine. But he brings that whole army to bear and turns it loose, so to speak, on the Jews. Now, a little background to this turning loose, because that disastrous outcome is what I read to you about in those verses today. During those years when he first came into power, from 175 BC to 168 BC, better part of 7 to 8 years, great tensions had been arising between Antiochus Epiphanes and Israel, the Jews. The tensions tended to center on the issue of the high priest and the control of the high priesthood. Now, why would that be the case? Well, the answer to that is that a nation didn't really exist. The Jews did not return from exile in Babylon to become a nation. They returned ethnically, but their land was under the control of the Medo-Persian Empire all during those years. Then it would be under the control of the Roman Empire. They didn't return from exile to have their political kingdom. That would await the Messiah's coming. At any rate, because they didn't have that, the position of power, political power, I guess you could say, within the Jewish people, revolved around who was in charge of their religion, because the religion was central to who they were as a people. And that, of course, was the high priest, who is described in their literature as the Prince of the Covenant. By the way, that stayed true right into the days of the Roman Empire, so that at the time of Jesus, when Palestine was under the control, Judea was under the control of the Romans through their puppet governors, the Herod and the rest of his descendants, the high priest was the key power among the Jewish people themselves. Well, at any rate, what was going on with the high priest is Jason, a person called Jason, at a particular point in time, bribed Antiochus Epiphanes to remove the existing high priest of the Jews. Onias was his name. But then his brother Menelaus, behind the scenes and behind Jason's back, gave an even bigger bribe to Antiochus Epiphanes, and Antiochus Epiphanes gave him the high priesthood. And so he stepped in as high priest. In order to pay this huge bribe that he gave to Antiochus Epiphanes, he sold the articles in the temple to get the money to do that. And then the old high priest that had been kicked out in this political move then protested publicly against Menelaus, and Menelaus had him killed. Well, as soon as this 168 BC message of Antiochus Epiphanes being turned back by the Roman Ptolemaic armies, Jason then decides, I've had enough of this, my brother's been the problem. He leads a rebellion, first and foremost against his brother Menelaus, and tries to create a coup in Jerusalem, but also to overthrow some of what Menelaus was doing in making the people subservient to Antiochus Epiphanes. Initially, Menelaus was successful in resisting Jason's rebellion, but eventually, as more and more people joined with Jason, he had to retreat to the citadel of the city of Jerusalem, that portion of the city where he could still defend himself and his followers. And he waited there for Antiochus Epiphanes to arrive with his army. Didn't have to wait long, remember, because the army wasn't far away. And he waited there for the deliverance. God never promised the Jews independence at this stage in his plan for them. A true nation was going to come under the kingship of the Messiah. Yet the Jews wanted to break free of the pressures of the world, so to speak, against them. And so they rebelled against Antiochus Epiphanes. Well, Antiochus Epiphanes' armies arrive, and a bloodshed disaster emerges. Join me tomorrow as we examine that part of the details of these days in the unfolding vision that God gives to Daniel. God bless.